Welcome, everyone. Before I pass it over to our speaker, we're thankful today to have Turnaround for Children, as well as Dr. Pamela Cantor and Gretchen Livesey join us. And so for Dr. Pamela Cantor, she practiced child and adolescent psychiatry for nearly 2 decades, specializing in trauma. She founded Turnaround for Children in 2002 after co-authoring a study on the impact of the 9/11 attacks on New York City school children. Today, Turnaround translates scientific knowledge about how children develop and learn into integrated tools, resources, and services for educators, school leaders, and school systems to establish the conditions and practice that drive learning and growth so that all students thrive. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to our speakers.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. I'm so pleased to be with you here today. We are in a moment right now with COVID-19, the nationwide protests for racial justice, where no one feels fully safe. But Black children and Black mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers rightfully feel more threatened than anyone. George Floyd's death is emblematic of 401 years of systemic racism, violence against Black bodies and Black humanity, and emblematic of the forces that have intentionally suffocated the unlimited potential of generations of Black people. Trust, which was already fleeting, is broken. And as children ask themselves, will I be safe running down my street? Will I be safe sitting on my porch? Will I be safe walking to school? This is going to present an enormous challenge when children return to classrooms. How can you progress and learn if your brain keeps thinking, watch out, watch out? Knowing this, what can educators do to support and educate all learners now and when schools reopen? Well, I believe you can start by looking for the brilliance in every child you teach. Every child with special needs who learns differently, and unleashing it. I believe you can reopen schools with purpose by enlisting your own superpowers as educators and citizens to build a better, more equitable education system. Before COVID and the events of the past 2 weeks, if I had had an opportunity to talk to you about human development, the development of the brain, and learning science, I would have begun with this. Each of us has 20,000 genes in our human genome, yet in our lifetime, fewer than 10% of these genes will ever be expressed. And what do you think determines what is in that 10%? It's context, the environments, experiences, and relationships of our lives. The context we're exposed to is the primary driver of who we become, including the expression of our genes. These processes are part of the science of epigenetics. Epi means above, the things which are above the genes that influence what our genes actually do. The risks and opportunities in development and evolution sit inside this one profoundly important point, that there is no separation of nature and nurture, biology and environment, brain and behavior, only a collaboration between them. And this means our lives are not predetermined by a genetic program. Genes are chemical followers. They are little packages of proteins covered with receptors that are triggered into expression by the environment's experiences and relationships in our lives. An epigenetic adaptation is about the biologic processes through which relationships and experiences get under the skin and influence our lifelong learning and health. So if nurture drives nature, there is good and bad news in that. It means that our brains are a living structure made up of tissue that is the most susceptible to change from experience of any tissue in the human body. And there are 3 key principles to know about brain development: astounding malleability of the brain, experience-dependent growth, and the role of context. And taken together, what this means is that there is no such thing as the developing child independent of context. Some of you may know that my organization, Turnaround for Children, was founded in the aftermath of 9/11. At the time, I was a practicing child psychiatrist in New York, specializing in trauma. Turnaround was founded on a single core insight: that adversity doesn't just happen to children, it happens inside their brains and bodies through the biologic mechanism of stress. I want to tell you what we learned after 9/11, and then I will tell you how this applies and doesn't apply to what we are experiencing right now in this time of racial unrest, economic instability, and the COVID-19 pandemic. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, I was asked to help lead a study to assess the response to 9/11 among New York City's public school children. The finding that surprised all of us at the time was that the most startling effects on children were not in the ground zero schools. They were in the children in the communities and schools of deepest poverty. I'll never forget walking into an elementary school in the South Bronx, into a first grade class. A teacher had asked her kids to draw a drawing about 9/11 to help them digest it. A little boy named Thomas, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, walked up to me with his drawing, and in it, there were these 2 little boxes in the background with smoke coming out, and in the foreground, there were 2 stick figure drawings of boys with guns pointed at each other. Thomas's drawing carried a message. It said, "I am scared of the violence I see every day when I come to school. I'm scared to come to school, and 9/11 is very far away." It was the immediate local context of Thomas's life that was producing fear and stress and activating the biologic mechanisms we will be talking about. And not surprisingly, these symptoms were most intense where the systems had been activated before because of prior trauma. And if you would like a snapshot of what home life is like right now for families across the country, Dr. Philip Fisher is a professor of psychology at the University of Oregon and the director of the Center for Translational Neuroscience. He's been surveying households in order to get a picture of what's going on for children across the country since this pandemic began. And his results show the households that are experiencing the most stress, depression, and anxiety have a young child with a learning disability, which means your skills, your compassion, your experiences working with children who have a broad range of learning differences are more important now than ever. Today, the stress and trauma children are witnessing and feeling is all around us. It's on our city streets, in front of the White House, in our homes, on TV, and social media 24/7. After 9/11, I went to visit classrooms all over the city, and I saw that teachers and leaders were trying to do everything in their power to improve academics, but seeming to be unaware of the effects of stress on the very parts of the brain that are involved in learning. And this is why I founded Turnaround, to create the conditions, the tools, the practices that could turn any school into a positive developmental and academic environment, one that could develop the capabilities and talents of the whole child, no matter their zip code or the color of their skin. In addition to all of this, there is a unique paradox when it comes to COVID, and that is that to keep ourselves physically safe, we have had to be physically distant. And this has disrupted all of our crucial connections to teachers, to friends, to communities of faith, even to members of our own families. And the crisis of trust that people, particularly young people of color, are witnessing and experiencing right now, where those who should protect them don't, won't, or can't, today, I say again, trust is broken. When trust and safety are broken, our bodies and our minds are seized by stress. So we have to talk about the biology of stress and what it does to us, and in particular, the limbic system, which is the learning and the emotion center of the brain. It consists of three structures: the prefrontal cortex for focus and attention, the hippocampus for memory, and the amygdala, which is the emotion center of our brain. These structures are intimately interconnected and cross-wired, and they develop together. This system is loaded with receptors for two hormonal systems, one that responds to stress and one that responds to love and trust. This is not an accident. Cortisol is the stress hormone, and oxytocin is often called the trust or love hormone. These hormones, think of them as chemical messengers. They get released because of experiences in our lives, and they carry chemical messages about these experiences to the brain, to the very same target, the structures of the limbic system. So when we ask the question about how context gets inside the brain, this is what we mean. When we experience stress, cortisol is released through our brains and our bodies, and it produces that familiar feeling of fight, flight, and freeze. It's intense when it happens, but if the stress is mild or tolerable, it's adaptive. It makes us alert and sharp and helps us prepare for an event like a test or a performance. This is our limbic system at work: attention, concentration, focus, memory, preparation. But when children have persistently high levels of stress, and that stress is not buffered by the presence of a trusted and calm adult, something else can happen. Children can get locked in that fight or flight feeling. It just won't let up. Cortisol can do a lot of harm to the structures in the brain that regulate focus, attention, emotion, the structures of the limbic system. Because I said at the beginning, adversity doesn't just happen to children. It happens inside their brains and bodies through the biologic mechanism of stress. But fortunately, that's not the end of the story. There's a big upside when we turn to another hormone, the hormone oxytocin. This is the hormonal system that produces feelings of trust, of love, attachment, and safety. And that's not all. Oxytocin hits the same structures in the brain as cortisol. Yet oxytocin is the more powerful because it can literally protect children at the level of the cell from the damaging effects of cortisol. Relationships that are strong and positive cause the release of oxytocin, and this not only helps children manage stress and offset the damaging effects of cortisol, it can actually produce resilience to future stress. Now, we all knew that relationships were important, but now we know the biologic basis of this. We know the why, and we know the how. So when we speak of the human relationship, we're not just talking about being kind and nice to a child. We're speaking of a connection that is built through consistent caring, protection, presence, and trust, the kind that can make a child believe something about themselves that they couldn't believe until you entered their lives. In fact, the human relationship and oxytocin are the most powerful examples we have of positive context. It's the most powerful buffer we have against the effects of stress, and we all need it, we adults and the kids, especially now. So the neurobiologic story here is simple. The brain is malleable. A brain under stress is shut down. It can't focus and concentrate. It has little working memory, and it is easily triggered by emotions. And it is our emotions that engage us or shut us down. I wonder how many of you are familiar with the marshmallow test. I suspect many of you. It was a test conducted in the 1970s at a nursery school in Stanford. The nursery school children were put in a room with a marshmallow and presented with a choice: eat the marshmallow right now or wait about 15 minutes and get a second marshmallow. The research findings on the children who could delay gratification and exert self-control for that length of time were correlated with all kinds of success in school, SAT scores, college acceptance, and even later success. But now fast forward to 2012. Dr. Celeste Kidd was a researcher then at the University of Rochester. She had worked in a homeless shelter, and she asked herself a question: would any of the kids I worked with at the shelter have ever waited to get that second marshmallow? This researcher repeated the marshmallow test, but under a different set of conditions. First, she put the children in a room with broken crayons and promised to come back with a brand new set. And in half the cases, that's exactly what she did. The child got a new set of crayons. But in half, the researcher came back and said, sorry, I don't have crayons after all. Then she repeated the marshmallow test. And what do you think happened? The kids who got the new crayons, where the promise was kept, waited for that second marshmallow. The kids where the promise was broken gobbled up the one in front of them right away. So the ability to delay gratification and exert self-control, it turns out, has a lot to do with whether you trust the person giving you the marshmallow. But here's the most important thing. Dr. Kidd challenged the assumptions in the original test and made the leap to understanding that self-control, this skill that is so important to learning, is not just in the child. It's in the child in a context that was designed to reveal the skill, in this case, through the experience of a trustful relationship. This researcher altered the microenvironment around the children, and by doing that, she was able to reveal the skill, the malleable skill of self-control that these children actually had. She did this by establishing trust with them. Think about what this story means about the environments we could create to reveal the potential skills and talents that exist in all learners, no matter how they learn. Think about the talents we as adults often don't see and won't see unless we design the environments to reveal them. So how do we do that? That's what we're going to talk about next. Because the science calls for a design that is mapped to the way the brain learns. A design that combines 5 elements: positive relationships, environments filled with safety and belonging, integrated supports, the intentional development of the skills, mindsets, and habits that all successful learners have, and rich, meaningful instructional experiences where students can learn in different ways and discover what they're capable of. The development of a whole child emerges when we combine these elements into experiences that connect to one another. And if you want to picture what this means, picture a shape like a web of experiences, because this is how our brains actually develop. Lots of connections that happen between the structures of the brain, and it is these connections that produce increasingly complex skills. A great example of this is how we learn to read. First, we're read to. We learn to recognize letters and how letters form words and sounds and create images and feelings, and we like the feeling of being read to. Each part of learning how to read involves different brain structures becoming wired together in different ways through the experience of learning to read. And eventually, we become able to do this complex thing called reading. This is how our brains become integrated and wired to produce any complex skill. And there are many, many pathways for doing that because all learning is variable. Take a look at this PET scan of this brain reading and look at the structures that light up. You have sight, hearing, expression, comprehension. Experiences that grow our brains can happen everywhere, in schools, communities, ball fields, everywhere that children grow and learn. And today, in the time of COVID, this means our homes, and someday soon, back into our classrooms. The good news is that all of the practices we've been discussing today are practices that are great for development, they're great for learning, and they're great for managing stress. Historically, there's been a false choice in education between the things we need to do on social and emotional development, physical and mental wellness, learner variability, and the pursuit of academic excellence, but not today. It is all one thing, and the non-negotiables for whole child design will cover all of the important bases for the adults as well as the kids. Today, we have no choice. The path to a calm classroom is a calm brain. The path to learning is a calm brain. And the path to doing both of these is to prioritize activities that build relationships, establish routines, and promote resilience, what we are calling the new 3 R's. And everything we're going to talk about now are the things that we must prioritize, especially today in the crisis of COVID, the pandemic, and the racial violence across the country. At home, and as we prepare for reentry to school, I want you to know that all of the things we're going to be talking about are drawn from the non-negotiables for whole child design. At Turnaround, we are calling these the new 3 R's. And these are activities that we can do in different settings. But let's go a bit deeper so that I can give you examples of each. Relationships are the first. They are the active ingredient in any learning environment because they are the way trust is built, oxytocin is released, and the limbic system is activated. In fact, trust is the antidote to stress, and relationships are the medium through which we experience trust. Gretchen?
Thanks, Pam. Hi, everybody. It's been great to chat with a couple of you as we've been listening to Pam and her presentation. As you'll see on the screen, we have several examples of things you can do on the ground with kids, even virtually, to maintain, to build and maintain relationships with them. One of the things I wanted to bring up is in our advisories, we like to suggest that people have a very predictable way of greeting children every day that will give you a little bit of insight into what they're feeling during the day. And we call this the gesture, one word, or emoji greeting. And I've just worked with a high school in Colorado who is a 100% virtual high school. And they were so excited about this. And you've probably seen or heard something like this before, but it's simply invite children as they enter your virtual space to create a gesture that exemplifies how they are feeling. Anything in their face, their arms, and from the chest up. And if they're unable to move those parts, they can put an emoji up or they can simply say a word. And it's a short way of checking in with each and every child that you are meeting with so that you can then do something like a 2x10 with children who may be signaling to you that they are struggling based on the emoji or the gesture that they did. You can follow up with them and spend some very intentional time checking in, finding out how they are, and just letting them know that you noticed and that they are important to you. We call it a 2x10 because it's simply 2 minutes every day for 10 consecutive days. And you do this whether or not the child is, how they're acting for the day. It's never a thing that you would take away because of struggle. It's something that they can count on. Back to you, Pam.
Thanks so much, Gretchen. So our second priority is routines. I don't know how many of you know, but the brain is actually a prediction machine. It loves order. It's calm when things are orderly, and it knows what's coming next. But it gets anxious and agitated when things are not predictable. Gretchen.
Thanks again, Pam. So as I foreshadowed in the daily greeting, doing that every day is one of the routines that kids can come to understand is going to happen. It makes them understand what's going to be the first thing that they do every day when they are having their time with you. And that is one of the ways that we relax the brain and we're ready for learning. Another great way to do this is to help kids with their routine planning. We have a technique called the priority list, which I think is especially helpful for students who have diverse ways of processing, because what it encourages them to do is to, with your help or on their own, create a list of everything that they feel they need to do today, and then to determine with you or with themselves what's the thing that they really don't want to do, and to do that one first and to get it out of the way. And we can do these lists together with your class, or you can help students individually to do it. But what it does is it allows students to put at the top something that they're not looking forward to, so that the rest of the day feels more spacious for them, and they can go into that with their open brains. Back to you, Pam.
Thanks, Gretchen. And you know, as I listen to you talk about prioritization, I'm reminded of the Edutopia video series that we collaborated on with Linda Darling Hammond and the team at Edutopia, which are 23 videos of these incredible practices. So I do recommend to the audience listening in checking out the Edutopia series. So our third priority is resilience, and building resilience is likely the most important task we have for ourselves and our kids right now. You might think that resilience is something you either have or you don't, like eye color, but resilience can be built just like a muscle. And the key to building resilience is recognizing first that we all have strengths to build upon. We have assets from the prior experiences of our lives, and even some we didn't know we had. And the key to making them stronger is building our regulation skills, physical, emotional, behavioral, cognitive, through co-regulating activities with each other and with our kids. Back to you, Gretchen.
Thanks again, Pam. So here's one that's been coming up quite a bit for us. It's knowing that students and kids and fellow adults are struggling with a variety of emotions right now. This is a little co-regulation practice we can actually do with ourselves and model it for our students, and then help them to do the same. And it's something called the emotion response strategy list. And what you do is, in a moment of regulation, hopefully you're all feeling regulated right now, is to think about some of the ways that you resource yourself, whether it's taking a walk with your dog, calling your mom, reading a funny meme, whatever it is that relaxes you, that connects you again to your grounded self, and make a list of those things. And then make a list of some of the emotions that you're feeling when things are hard: stress, distress. It could be loneliness, distance. And when you're feeling those ways, when you recognize those emotions in yourself, go to your list of the ways that you remember to self-resource when you're not dysregulated. And that is your go-to list. I have one on my refrigerator. And when I am feeling stressed out, I have something hard coming up, I go by and like, oh, that's right, I should call my kid. She brings my stress level down immediately. And having kids have this resource for them, posted somewhere, online somewhere, on their refrigerator, teaches them that they have the resources within themselves to manage their own emotions. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you. You know, in 2017, Turnaround helped found the Science of Learning and Development Alliance. And we came together to answer a question that's very pertinent to what we're talking about right now. How do we use 21st century science to transform 21st century learning? And if we did, what science should we pay attention to? The big aha was realizing that our 20th century system truly was never designed to develop the whole child. It was never designed to develop the learner or to embrace learner variability. It was never designed for equity, and it was never designed to unleash student potential. But what if we did use 21st century science to transform our 21st century education system? The year is 2020 now, but exactly 100 years ago in 1920, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. At the time, people believed that something called miasma caused disease. But his discovery was based on a new theory, the germ theory, that germs cause disease. So you could think that everybody celebrated this, but they didn't. They resisted it because it challenged all of their assumptions about what causes disease. But then something big happened, World War II, and millions of lives were saved because of penicillin. And you had this huge database that supported the new theory and the new solution that this drug represented. It changed the field of medicine forever. I believe we could be in one of those inflection points right now. Now, resistance to scientific knowledge is alive and well, even today, after more than 100,000 coronavirus deaths and close to 375,000 worldwide. But COVID-19 and the racial injustices we are witnessing have done something else. They have laid bare the inequities, the fallacies, the inadequacies, and the failures of the education system we have. That 1 in 3 parents of infants and toddlers are skipping or reducing meals right now. That 9 million students do not have access to broadband, and that all of this is concentrated in low-income communities are powerful indicators of the injustices of today and the risks to health and academic growth that they carry. Until we bridge that chasm, the door to an equitable education is literally shut for these children. Today, our penicillin, were we to use it, is to take what we already know from the science of learning and development and use it to define a new purpose for education, a new whole child design for all the settings in which children grow and learn, including our homes and our schools. Because settings designed that way would be like an ecological vaccine, rich in protective factors that ignite the developing brain so it can learn increasingly complex skills, promote wellness, and shield children from the damaging effects of stress all at the same time. This change won't happen overnight, but we do have to reduce the sources of stress in young people's lives by confronting the extreme racism, injustice, and inequity of opportunity that exists today. And we have reached the limit of what is achievable through standardized approaches to learning, just like other fields have. These approaches always work for some, but not for many others, and especially will not work for children who learn in different ways or have special needs. When standardized fields get disrupted, they move to personalization. Think retail and Amazon, or entertainment and Netflix. And when other fields like medicine hit a point like this, where fundamental assumptions and beliefs had to be challenged, a transformational change occurred. And there were huge benefits for many more people, like with penicillin. Well, this could be one of those opportunities right now. Today, this is possible in ways that were not true even 20 years ago. As I close, I want to ask you a question. Are you a person that believes that skills in children are something that some have and others don't? Because if you are in that group, you are with the scientist Sir Francis Galton, who in the 1890s believed that all human skill fell into bins of abilities depending on how close or near you are to the average. If you believe this, then you really need to read Todd Rose's book on the subject, The End of Average. Or are you with the education psychologist Benjamin Bloom, who described in his 2 Sigma paper of 1984 that what one child can do, nearly all children can do under highly favorable conditions? Because if you are with Bloom, this means challenging the assumptions about what children are capable of, and therefore the goals of our education system itself, because skills exist in a potential state in all children. That's right. Talent is everywhere. It's not a bell curve. And if we standardize the approach to building talent and skill, for sure it will work for some, but not for many others. And standardized approaches will not reveal the potential that exists in most children. In fact, if a Mozart or a Martin Luther King or a Malala existed in a classroom designed the way many classrooms today are designed, it is more than likely we wouldn't know they were there. Because the approaches we've taken thus far to learning and schools have not fully challenged our assumptions about talent. Is it plentiful or is it scarce? Or individual growth? Are skills malleable or are they fixed? Or human potential? What is any child capable of under the right conditions? The message in the science is so optimistic. Genes are chemical followers. This is the biologic truth that context shapes the expression of our genes. We can ask and answer the same question as researchers in other fields have asked, the same question that Dr. Celeste Kidd asked with the marshmallow test. What can we do that will work optimally for this child in this context? And it is that question that gets you to fundamentally different answers about the way our schools and education system of the future needs to be designed. One that is designed to see and unleash the potential that exists in each and every child. There has never, ever been a more important moment, a more urgent reason, or a clearer call to action to do this. Thank you all so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Cantor. I did want to remind everyone who hasn't already included their questions in the chat that you're welcome to add them now, and we're going to go into that Q&A session. But I did actually have a question for you, Dr. Cantor, to start off. So I know, of course, you mentioned the essential element of developing trust and really creating that strong bond with students and children in general in order to help them thrive. So do you have any maybe tips or best strategies for teachers and school leaders to develop that trust in themselves in order to best serve their students and develop the same with their students?
Gretchen, do you want to take that one?
I will, yes, absolutely. I think I'm going to use as a role model one of the principals I'm working with in Oakland, California, who has established a daily huddle with his staff as a way to demonstrate the importance of connection among the adults at the school. It's a time that he uses to visibly, physically check in with each and every staff member for everybody to notice who might be missing through the day, and therefore which students may be without their main adult. As you all know, probably many of you are the main adult for some of the kids in your school. And when you're missing, it's so important for the rest of the staff to know so that they can lean in and help. It's also a place where He shares stories, things that happened in the week before, and helps the staff to also sort of think ahead about what's coming next. So I think those sorts of trust building activities modeled by a leader in a school with the teachers creates a community feeling that is passed along then for the teachers, and they will do those same structures with their classrooms. That's a great question, thank you. I see another question in the chat. Gabrielle, are you going to be the one to voice those to Pam?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to mention, someone was asking, what are some ways to work with parents of children who have experienced trauma? So the person in the chat does recognize, you know, sending them to professionals to help them, but maybe what are some other ways than that?
One of the things that we are also doing in a number of our schools are teacher-family check-ins. So before I address the point about trauma, the issue of relationships and relational trust applies to what we build with our families right now. Because there are things going on in families that children are witnessing, including losses. And if teachers are not aware of those things, it's going to be tremendously challenging for the kids and for the relationship between teachers and children. The other thing I'm also aware of as I say this is that many of these things are going on in the lives of teachers. So trauma is not something that is only being experienced by our children and their families, but also in the families of the adult staff. The thing that maybe is hardest to believe, but there is nothing more powerful that we have, even when you think about mental health treatment. The active ingredient in mental health treatment is the relationship. The active ingredient in teaching is the relationship. Now there is knowledge, there is curriculum, there is all of these things. But when I'm asked the question, what can we do that is going to help our children? It is your presence. It is the quality of your listening. It's the ability to answer questions, even if your answer is, I don't know, but I'll find out. But presence is the single most powerful thing that is an antidote to the effects of trauma in all of our lives. So everything that I'm saying that's focused on children is also focused on you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And that kind of relates to another question someone was asking, more on the lines of advocacy. So how can, whether it's a school staff or just a school member, communicate with the gatekeepers of K-12 education and those decision makers the importance of this idea of attending to the whole child, especially in the context of school reopening?
Yeah. I mean, there is a tremendous amount of pressure going on right now that is expressed in different forms. And one of the most common that you're going to hear is around mental health service, more mental health service capacity. And I'd be hard pressed to be a psychiatrist not advocating for more mental health service capacity. I advocate for that all the time. But mental health service, we at Turnaround have learned over 20 years, is really not the only answer to this. That we have to take a public health approach to support. And the public health approach is embedded in something called a tiered support system, which has to do with what we do for all kids, what we do in a classroom, and what we do for the kids who need mental health service. And the reason I'm giving you this kind of answer is because I want to give you some tools for what to advocate for. And what we all have to be advocating for literally every school in this country, is that it have a fully fleshed out tiered support system. What is in tier 1, what is universal, are the things we've been talking about. Relationships, skill development, culture, safety, belonging. That's all tier 1. Tier 2 are ways that teachers have of beginning to sense who in a classroom is struggling, either because a child can't concentrate, or they could do one thing, but now they can't do that very same thing. And you know the reason is because of stress. And then there is tier 3, which is mental health service delivery. The single most important thing we could be advocating for collectively right now is whole child design. And one of the most crucial components of whole child design is a tiered support system. So let's all do that.
I would just further mention, thank you. I'm going to cut in for just a second. Further mention that many of you who may be working with the special education population or with diverse learners are really often tier 4. The multi-tiered system of support is everything that should be available to children before they get a referral to special education. And I know many of you have probably realized in working with a child that probably the reason the child was initially referred was simply because nobody bothered, not that they bothered, people were unable to see what was blocking that child from reaching their true potential. And it was often not a learning disability. And so a robust multi-tiered system of support would allow those of you who do the hard work of working with the diverse learners would actually get to concentrate on those children and not with the children who people were simply deciding they were too difficult to work with. Thanks.
And similarly, there was a question submit prior to, like in the registration form, somebody submit a question. And it's kind of, what are your thoughts and what kind of impact do you anticipate from the potential economic crisis that is beginning to unfold, and how will that impact families, particularly with children who have special needs?
This is an area of enormous concern, and I can crystallize it with a very concrete example. And this example comes from a conversation with John King, who, as you all know, is the head of something called the Education Trust. And so one of the things we were talking about are the anticipated budget cuts and how those budget cuts are going to be done. And there are districts across the country that will take a percentage and they will just use the same percentage across an entire district or an entire state in some instances. Well, if we do it that way, based on percentages, what is that percentage going to mean in an already significantly under-resourced district? Okay, proportionately, the cut is going to be far worse in a district that is already under-resourced. But John King said that there were examples where states and districts were taking a different approach. They were actually doing the cuts based on proportions that would be greater from the more affluent districts, such that that money could be reallocated to districts with fewer resources. So we can make decisions toward equity right now when we think about where is the need the greatest, where are the resources the least, and what can we do that begins to create a much more equitable balance around the resources that kids and teachers need right now in order to address the needs of all of their children. And as I said earlier in the talk, when I was talking about Phil Fisher's data, it's very clear that children with special needs and children with learning issues are where any cut is going to be particularly painful.
Thank you very much. I think that is the remainder of our initial questions. But I did want to remind everyone that we will have this recording available for people to reference. And Dr. Cantor and Gretchen, I didn't know if you wanted to have any closing remarks.
The one thing I'd want to say is that that most of us have learned such an enormous amount from the schools and teachers that work with children that have different learning needs. And I think what all of us know is when environments are designed for those children, they work optimally for all children. So I do want to thank you as a community for the work that you're doing and for the years and years of learning that I've had from many of you. The second thing I want to say is that Turnaround's website is loaded with resources, all of which we're offering open source. There was a resource page for you in particular, but our website has many, many other resources for you. And I hope you'll avail yourself of them. Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.